When fire destroys a passenger jet at 38,000 feet and both pilots die from smoke, everyone faces certain death. But one passenger has a secret, an 11-year-old girl trained by her late pilot father. Now she must land the burning aircraft alone, or 143 people will die. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The sun was shining bright on Tuesday morning, September 15th. At the airport, hundreds of people were moving through security checkpoints, buying coffee, and finding their gates. Flight 447 was boarding passengers for a routine trip to Seattle. Among the travelers was an 11-year-old girl named Maya Rodriguez. Maya walked down the jetway carrying an oversized backpack decorated with unicorns and rainbows. Her dark hair was tied in two neat braids. She wore jeans and a purple jacket. To anyone watching, she looked like any other child traveling alone. Small, quiet, and a little nervous. A flight attendant named Jennifer greeted her at the door with a warm smile. "Hello, sweetie. Traveling all by yourself today?" she asked in that special voice adults use when talking to children. Maya nodded shyly. "Yes, ma'am. That's very brave. I'm Jennifer, and I'll check on you during the flight. Do you need help finding your seat?" "No, thank you. I'm in 12A. Maya made her way down the aisle and found her window seat. She struggled a bit to lift her heavy backpack into the overhead bin, but she managed. An elderly woman sitting in the aisle seat smiled at her. "Are you going to visit your mommy or daddy, dear?" the woman asked kindly. Maya's smile faded for just a second. "I'm visiting my aunt," she answered softly, then turned to look out the window. The woman nodded and opened her book. She didn't ask anything more. Nobody on that plane knew the truth about Maya Rodriguez. They didn't know about her secret training. They didn't know she was carrying knowledge that would soon mean the difference between life and death for everyone on board. 8 months earlier, Maya's father had died. Captain Daniel Rodriguez had been a commercial airline pilot for 15 years. He loved flying more than anything except his daughter. When doctors told him he had cancer and only months to live, he made a decision. He would teach Maya everything he knew about flying airplanes. "Maya," he told her one evening, "I want to give you something special. Something that will stay with you forever. I'm going to teach you how to fly." Maya was confused. "But Dad, I'm only 10 years old. Kids can't fly planes." Her father smiled. "Not legally, no. But that doesn't mean you can't learn. Knowledge is the best gift I can give you." So they started. Captain Rodriguez bought professional flight simulation software for their home computer. Every night after dinner, they sat together in front of the screen. He taught her how to read instruments, how to understand what every button and switch did, how to communicate with air traffic controllers. "This is the altimeter," he explained, pointing at the screen. "It tells you how high you are. This is the airspeed indicator. This shows how fast you're going. And this is the artificial horizon. It shows if your wings are level or if you're turning." Maya learned quickly. She was smart and paid attention to every detail. But her father didn't just teach her normal flying. He taught her emergency procedures. "Maya, listen carefully," he said one night, his voice serious. "In aviation, we prepare for things we hope will never happen. A good pilot knows that staying calm when everything goes wrong is what saves lives." They practiced engine failures. They practiced electrical problems. They practiced fires. Night after night, Maya sat at the computer and learned what to do when disasters happened. If you ever have a fire on a plane, her father taught her, you have only minutes. Maybe 10 minutes, maybe less. Fire at altitude is the worst emergency a pilot can face. "Why, Dad?" "Because fire spreads fast in an airplane. It can destroy the systems that keep the plane flying. And you're miles above the ground with nowhere to land quickly. Maya practiced emergency landings over and over. Her father made the simulations harder and harder. Failed engines, smoke in the cockpit, systems breaking down one after another. Each time, Maya had to stay calm and land the plane safely. Remember, her father told her, when everything is going wrong, you focus on 3 things in order. Aviate, navigate, communicate. First, fly the airplane. Second, figure out where you're going. Third, talk to air traffic control. Always in that order. By the time Captain Rodriguez died, Maya could handle emergencies that would challenge professional pilots. But she was still just a child. She went to school, played with friends, and tried to deal with her grief. Nobody knew about her secret skills. Flight 447 pushed back from the gate right on time. Maya looked out her window as the plane taxied toward the runway. She watched the wings flex slightly as they rolled over bumps. She noticed the flaps extending as the pilots prepared for takeoff. The engines roared to life, and the plane accelerated down the runway. Maya felt the familiar sensation of being pushed back in her seat. Then the nose lifted, the wheels left the ground, and they were flying. The plane climbed smoothly into the clear blue sky. Jennifer came by with drinks and snacks. "How are you doing, honey? Would you like some apple juice?" "Yes, please," Maya said. "Are you scared of flying?" Maya shook her head. "No, ma'am. I like flying." Jennifer smiled and moved on to the next row. If only she had known how much Maya really knew about flying. In the cockpit, Captain Michael Thompson and First Officer Sarah Chen were doing their jobs perfectly. Thompson was 52 years old with 28 years of flying experience. Chen was younger but highly skilled. They had flown together many times before. This was supposed to be a routine flight. The plane reached its cruising altitude of 38,000 feet. Everything was normal. Passengers settled in, some reading, some sleeping, some working on laptops. The flight attendants moved through the cabin offering drinks and snacks. Nobody knew that deep in the electrical systems below the cockpit, something terrible was about to happen. At exactly 10:47 in the morning, 38 minutes into the flight, a warning light blinked on in the cockpit. "Captain, I'm seeing an electrical fault on the number 2 generator," First Officer Chen reported calmly. Captain Thompson looked at the warning light. "Switch to backup," he instructed. Chen's fingers moved across the overhead panel, engaging the backup electrical system. The warning light went out. Both pilots relaxed slightly. But they didn't know what was happening below them. A tiny defect in the wiring, so small nobody had ever noticed it, had been there since the plane was built. When the backup system turned on, it sent a surge of electricity through the bad wire. The insulation melted instantly. Bare wires touched each other, creating sparks. The sparks ignited the insulation material around them. Within seconds, flames were spreading through the electrical bay. The fire found its way into spaces behind the cockpit walls where sound-dampening materials fed the flames. Black smoke began filling the hidden spaces. Suddenly, the cockpit exploded with warning lights and alarms. Fire warnings. Electrical failures. Smoke detectors. Multiple systems failing at once. Fire. "We have fire!" Captain Thompson shouted, grabbing for the fire suppression controls. "Fire in the electrical bay. Discharging suppression system now." He pulled the handle that released firefighting chemicals into the electrical compartment. For a few seconds, both pilots hoped they had caught it in time. But the fire was already too big. Smoke began seeping into the cockpit through vents and cracks. Thin wisps at first, then thicker. The smell was terrible, burning plastic and electrical components. Thompson grabbed the radio microphone. "Seattle Center, Flight 447, declaring emergency. We have fire indication and smoke in the cockpit. Requesting immediate vectors for emergency landing, nearest suitable airport. Flight 447, Seattle Center, roger your emergency, the controller responded. Nearest airport is McCord Air Force Base, 48 miles northwest. Turn left heading 320. In the cabin, passengers started to smell the smoke. Someone screamed. Others looked around in confusion and fear. The smoke was getting thicker, coming from ceiling vents. Jennifer grabbed the PA microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm and stay in your seats with your seatbelts fastened. We are experiencing a technical issue and will be landing shortly. But Jennifer's voice was shaking. She could see the smoke getting worse. This was bad. Very bad. Maya sat in her window seat, watching the smoke. Her heart was pounding. She knew exactly what was happening. Her father had taught her about electrical fires. She knew the pilots had only minutes to get the plane on the ground before the fire destroyed critical systems. In the cockpit, the situation was deteriorating fast. Smoke was now so thick that Thompson and Chen could barely see their instruments. They put on their emergency oxygen masks, but visibility was almost zero. We're losing hydraulics, Chen reported, her voice tight with stress. Flight controls are getting stiff. Thompson wrestled with the control yoke. The plane was responding slowly. The fire was eating away at the systems that controlled the aircraft. Then flames burst through the wall behind the center console between the pilot's seats. Bright orange flames, terrifyingly close. Thompson grabbed a fire extinguisher and sprayed it at the flames, but there were too many. The fire was winning. We need to get this plane down now. Thompson shouted. But even as he spoke, he started coughing violently. Despite the oxygen mask, he had been breathing toxic fumes for several minutes. The smoke, the stress, the fear, all of it was too much for his heart. Captain Michael Thompson clutched his chest as pain exploded through him. A massive heart attack struck him down. He slumped forward over the controls, unconscious in seconds. Captain! Captain! Sarah Chen reached for him, trying to help. But at that exact moment, she too was overcome. The toxic smoke had filled her lungs. Her vision went dark. She collapsed sideways in her seat. Both pilots were unconscious. Nobody was flying the plane. Flight 447 continued on autopilot, flying straight ahead while fire consumed the cockpit. The aircraft was still at 38,000 feet. The nearest airport was still miles away. And everyone on board was about to die. In the cabin, smoke was now thick throughout the plane. Flames were visible through gaps in ceiling panels. Passengers were screaming, crying, praying. Children were sobbing. The flight attendants were trying to keep people calm, but there was nothing they could do. The plane needed to be landed. But there was nobody in the cockpit who could land it. Maya Rodriguez unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. Her whole body was shaking, but her mind was suddenly crystal clear. She knew the pilots were either unconscious or dead. She knew the plane had maybe 10 minutes before the fire destroyed enough systems to make it unflyable. She knew that every second counted. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that she was the only person on this burning aircraft who had any idea how to fly it. She started moving toward the front of the plane, pushing through the smoke-filled aisle. Other passengers grabbed at her. "Sit down. It's not safe," someone yelled. But Maya kept moving. Jennifer saw her and rushed over, trying to stop her. "Honey, no. Get back to your seat." Maya looked up at Jennifer. Despite the fear, despite the smoke and flames and chaos, Maya's voice was steady. "The pilots are dead or unconscious," she said clearly. "I know how to fly. I'm going to land this plane." Jennifer's mind couldn't process what she was hearing. This was a child. An 11-year-old girl was saying she could fly a commercial jet. It was impossible. It was insane. But Jennifer looked into Maya's eyes and saw something there. Certainty. Knowledge. Determination. Around them, people were screaming. The plane was filling with smoke. Fire was spreading. They were all going to die. Jennifer made a split-second decision. She stepped aside. Maya pushed through the cockpit door. The scene inside the cockpit was like something from a nightmare. Smoke was so thick Maya could barely see 3 feet ahead. Flames were visible in multiple spots, eating through walls and panels. Warning lights covered every surface, flashing red and amber. Alarms were screaming. Both pilots were slumped in their seats, unconscious. Captain Thompson was forward over the controls. First Officer Chen was sideways, her oxygen mask hanging loose. For just one moment, Maya's 11-year-old brain wanted to shut down. She wanted to run back to her seat, close her eyes, and pretend this wasn't happening. But then she heard her father's voice in her memory. Clear and calm, the way he had sounded during all those hours of training. When everything goes wrong, Maya, you take it one step at a time. Aviate, navigate, communicate. Always in that order. Stay calm. Think. Act. Maya climbed into the captain's seat. She was so small she could barely see over the instrument panel. Her feet didn't reach the rudder pedals on the floor. But she didn't have time to worry about that. Through the smoke, she could see the primary flight display. The artificial horizon showed the wings were level. The altimeter showed 38,000 feet. The airspeed was steady. The autopilot was still engaged, which was good. It meant the plane was flying itself for now. But she could see the cascade of system failures on the displays. Electrical systems failing. Hydraulic pressure dropping. Fire warnings everywhere. She needed to communicate. She needed help. With shaking hands, Maya reached for the radio transmit button on the control yoke. She pressed it and spoke. Her voice was higher than any air traffic controller had ever heard on an emergency frequency. It was clearly a child's voice. But it was also clear and controlled. Seattle Center, Flight 447, emergency traffic. Both pilots are incapacitated. I am an 11-year-old passenger with flight training. I need immediate assistance to land this aircraft. In the Seattle Air Route Traffic Control Center, Controller James Morrison was staring at his radar screen when he heard the transmission. For a long moment, he couldn't process what he had just heard. A child's voice. An 11-year-old. Saying the pilots were incapacitated. His first thought was that this had to be some kind of sick joke. But the transponder code confirmed it was definitely Flight 447. And that flight had declared an emergency just minutes ago. Morrison keyed his microphone. Flight 447, Seattle Center, confirm you are a passenger and the flight crew is incapacitated. Maya's response came immediately. Affirmative, Seattle. Captain and first officer are both unconscious. I have smoke and fire in cockpit. I estimate less than 10 minutes before fire compromises flight controls. I need vectors to nearest suitable airport and landing instructions. The terminology was perfect. Professional. But the voice was unmistakably a child. Morrison felt ice run through his veins. This was impossible. This couldn't be happening. But it was. Other controllers and supervisors were gathering around his station now, listening in disbelief. But Morrison knew he didn't have time to question the impossible. He had to treat this like any other emergency and pray that somehow this would work. Flight 447, understand you have fire on board and need immediate landing. Nearest suitable airport is McCord Air Force Base, approximately 48 miles northwest of your position. Can you execute a turn to heading 320? Maya looked at the heading indicator. They were currently on a heading of 285. She needed to turn right about 35 degrees. She had done this hundreds of times in the simulator. She reached for the autopilot mode control panel. Her fingers found the heading select knob. She turned it until the display showed 320, then pressed the button to engage the new heading. The aircraft began a smooth, gentle turn to the right. The autopilot was doing exactly what it was supposed to do. Seattle, Flight 447 turning to 320, Maya transmitted. Confirming McCord Air Force Base. I'll need full emergency equipment standing by. I have approximately 140 people on board. Morrison was already coordinating with McCord. Emergency vehicles were rolling. Fire trucks, ambulances, rescue equipment, all of it racing to the runway. Flight 447, continue present heading. Begin descent to maintain 12,000 feet. I'm going to give you vectors for a straight-in approach to McCord's runway 16. It's 13,000 feet long, so you'll have plenty of room. Maya acknowledged and began programming the autopilot for the descent. But as she did, she realized they had a major problem. The smoke in the cockpit was getting worse. She could barely see the instruments now. If she couldn't see, she couldn't fly. She remembered something her father had taught her. She reached up to the overhead panel and found the cockpit ventilation controls. She shut off the recirculation fans and opened the outflow valve to maximum. This created pressure that would pull some of the smoke out. It helped a little. Not much, but enough that she could see the displays. The aircraft was descending through 30,000 feet. Maya could see McCord Air Force Base on the navigation display now. The distance was counting down. 42 miles. 40 miles. 38. Behind her, through the open cockpit door, she could hear passengers screaming and crying. She could feel heat from the fire on her back. The flames were spreading, getting closer to critical systems. She keyed the radio again. Seattle, Flight 447. I need landing configuration guidance. I've practiced this in simulation, but I need to confirm the procedure for this aircraft type. Morrison had a Boeing 737 operations manual in front of him now. Flight 447, at 10 miles from the field, slow to 250 knots and begin lowering flaps to 5 degrees. At 5 miles, gear down, flaps 15. Final approach, flaps 30, target speed 140 knots. Maya's mind raced through her training. It matched what her father had taught her. Affirmative, Seattle. That matches my training. I'm 26 miles out now. She paused, then added something that showed remarkable awareness. I should tell you I'm too short to properly reach the rudder pedals. I'm going to need to land using primarily aileron control. Also, I'm planning maximum auto brake setting. Morrison felt his stomach drop. The rudder pedals controlled direction on the ground. Without them, landing would be incredibly difficult. But there was no choice. Flight 447, be advised McCord winds are currently 350 at 8 knots, so you'll have nearly a direct headwind on runway 16. That should help with directional control. Maya felt a tiny bit of relief. A headwind meant she would touch down at a slower ground speed. And the wind being nearly straight down the runway meant less crosswind to correct for. The fire continued to rage. Maya could feel the controls getting softer, less responsive. The hydraulic systems were failing. She was running out of time. At 15 miles, she began slowing the aircraft. At 12 miles, she reached for the flap lever and moved it to the 5-degree position. The aircraft shuddered slightly as the flaps extended. At 10 miles out, McCord Air Force Base appeared through the windscreen ahead. Maya could see the long ribbon of runway. Along both sides were emergency vehicles with flashing lights. Dozens of them. All waiting for her. Seattle, Flight 447. I have the field in sight. Canceling autopilot and going to manual flight now. Her hand moved to the autopilot disconnect button. For just a second, she hesitated. Once she disconnected it, she would be truly flying this massive machine. If she made a mistake, everyone would die. She pressed the button. The autopilot disconnected with a soft chirp. Suddenly, Maya felt the full weight of the aircraft through the control yoke. It was heavier than the simulator, more real. But it responded to her inputs. She made a small correction, aligning with the runway centerline. 7 miles out. She moved the gear lever to the down position. The aircraft shuddered as the massive landing gear extended from the wings and fuselage. 3 green lights illuminated on the panel. All gear down and locked. At 5 miles, she moved the flaps to 15 degrees. At 4 miles, she committed to the landing. There was no going around, no second chance. She moved the flaps to the final 30-degree position. The aircraft settled into its final approach configuration. 3 miles. Maya could see individual vehicles now, could see people watching this burning aircraft approach. Flight 447, you're on a perfect approach path, Morrison transmitted, and for the first time, Maya heard hope in the controller's voice. Continue as you are. Runway is yours. All emergency equipment is standing by. 2 miles. The runway was growing larger in the windscreen, filling her view. Maya made tiny corrections with the yoke, keeping the center line perfectly aligned. She could feel sweat running down her face, mixing with tears from the smoke. Her hands were shaking, but she kept them steady through pure willpower. This was for her father. For all the hours he had spent teaching her. This was for all the people behind her, trusting an 11-year-old girl to do the impossible. 1 mile. She was over the approach lights now. The runway was right there, enormous and terrifying at the same time. Maya pulled the throttles to idle and began to flare, pulling back gently on the yoke to raise the nose and slow the descent rate. Her father's voice was clear in her head. Easy. Not too much. Let the aircraft settle. Wait for it. The runway rushed up to meet them. The main landing gear touched down first, and Maya felt the wheels make contact. The tires squealed against concrete. Then the nose gear came down, and they were on the ground. The auto brakes engaged, throwing her forward against the seatbelt. The aircraft decelerated rapidly. 60 knots. 50. 40. 30. 20. And then they stopped. Flight 447 sat motionless on the runway, about 4,000 feet from where they had touched down. Maya sat frozen in the captain's seat for a long moment, unable to process what had just happened. Then training took over one more time. She pulled the engine fire handles, shutting down both engines. She turned off all electrical systems, removing power from the burning aircraft. Emergency vehicles surrounded the plane within seconds. Firefighters deployed foam and water on the flames. Emergency slides deployed automatically from the doors, and passengers began evacuating. People were sliding down to safety, crying, screaming, hugging each other. They couldn't believe they were alive. Inside the cockpit, Maya tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't work. All the adrenaline that had kept her going was gone. She collapsed to the floor, shaking uncontrollably. Jennifer, who had stayed near the cockpit door throughout the landing, rushed in and scooped Maya up in her arms. "I've got you, sweetie. I've got you. You're safe now. You did it." Jennifer was sobbing as she carried Maya down the aisle toward the exit. Medical personnel met them at the bottom of the emergency slide. Maya was placed on a stretcher and given oxygen. As paramedics loaded her into an ambulance, she looked back at the aircraft. Smoke and steam poured from it as firefighters continued their work. The plane was destroyed, would never fly again. But everyone aboard had survived. 143 people were alive because an 11-year-old girl refused to accept that death was inevitable. The story exploded across news channels within hours. Video footage from the ground showed the aircraft landing with smoke trailing from it. The fact that an 11-year-old girl had been flying was impossible to believe. Yet it was absolutely true. Investigators from the National Transportation Safety Board arrived that evening. When they interviewed Maya in the hospital where she was being treated for smoke inhalation, they were stunned by her technical knowledge. The investigation revealed the full extent of the electrical system failure. Maya's actions were analyzed by aviation experts worldwide. The consensus was remarkable. She had made exactly the right decisions at every critical point. Professional pilots with decades of experience stated publicly that many qualified pilots might not have handled the situation as well. Captain Michael Thompson had died of a heart attack during the emergency. First Officer Sarah Chen survived but required months of recovery from severe smoke inhalation. Maya became famous overnight, though fame was not something she wanted. She was invited on news programs, offered book and movie deals, and received commendations from aviation organizations. But what Maya wanted most was to honor her father's memory. She eventually started a foundation, providing flight training scholarships to young people who had lost parents. On the one-year anniversary, Maya visited McCord Air Force Base for a memorial ceremony. She stood on the same runway where she had landed the burning aircraft. Jennifer was there, along with dozens of survivors. Air traffic controller James Morrison traveled from Seattle to meet the young girl whose voice he would never forget. A plaque was unveiled near the runway, commemorating Flight 447 and honoring Captain Michael Thompson. Maya placed flowers near the plaque. When she spoke to the gathered crowd, her voice was still young but carried weight. "My dad taught me to fly because he loved aviation," she said quietly. "He taught me emergency procedures because he believed knowledge was the best gift he could give me. He never could have known his teaching would save 143 people." Her voice caught with emotion. "I was so scared that day. I'm not a hero. I'm just a kid who knew how to fly because my dad taught me. I couldn't just sit there while everyone died." She paused, tears running down her face. "I miss him every day. But I know he would be proud that his teaching mattered." The crowd applauded, many crying openly. These were people who had looked death in the face and been saved by a child's courage and skill. The months following the incident were difficult for Maya. She suffered from nightmares, seeing smoke and fire every time she closed her eyes. She started therapy to deal with the trauma. Her Aunt Maria took care of her, providing love and support. Maya continued going to school, trying to have a normal life. But nothing was normal anymore. She received hundreds of letters from people around the world. Children who had lost parents reached out, finding inspiration in her courage. Aviation professionals expressed their respect for what she had accomplished. One email came from a 13-year-old boy named Marcus whose firefighter father had died. He wrote that Maya's story had helped him see that his father's legacy could live on through him, just as Captain Rodriguez's legacy had lived on through Maya. Maya wrote back, sharing that grief was a journey, not a destination. Some days were harder than others. But channeling grief into purpose, into helping others, was how they could transform tragedy into meaning. Several months after the incident, Maya decided she needed to face her fear of flying again. With her aunt's support, she found a flight instructor who specialized in working with people who had aviation trauma. Captain Rebecca Torres was a retired airline pilot in her 60s with kind eyes and a calm manner. "My job isn't to make you a pilot," Torres told Maya at their first meeting. "My job is to help you reclaim the joy of flying that was stolen from you." They started slowly. First just sitting in a small plane on the ground with the engine off. Then starting the engine and feeling its vibration. Finally, after several sessions, they flew together. When Maya took the controls of that small plane and felt it respond to her inputs, something inside her healed a little. For the first time since that terrible day, she felt the pure joy of flying that she and her father had shared. Tears streamed down her face as she flew, but they were different tears. They were tears of release, of reclaiming something precious. "Dad," she whispered, "I'm flying again. I hope you can see this." As Maya approached her 13th birthday, she reflected on everything that had happened. She had spoken at aviation safety conferences, met with government officials, and helped launch changes in aircraft safety systems. Her foundation had awarded scholarships to 5 young people who had lost parents, giving them opportunities to pursue flight training or aerospace education. But perhaps most importantly, Maya had learned that healing was possible even after unimaginable trauma. She had learned that she could honor her father's memory not by being perfect or fearless, but by being authentically herself. She eventually decided to pursue aerospace engineering rather than becoming a pilot. She wanted to improve aircraft safety systems so other children would never have to do what she had done. But she would always remember that day when she was 11 years old. Sitting in a burning cockpit, too small to reach the pedals, too young to be responsible for so many lives, yet somehow finding the knowledge and courage to do the impossible. The story of Maya Rodriguez would be told for generations. It would inspire countless young people to believe in their own capabilities. It would change how aviation professionals thought about emergency procedures and human factors. But for Maya, it would always be deeply personal. The worst day of her life and also the day that gave her purpose. The day she lost the last of her childhood innocence but gained an understanding of her own strength. The day her father's love saved lives even though he was no longer alive to see it. Years later, Maya would speak at schools and conferences, telling young people that knowledge is never wasted, that skills learned with love can echo far beyond their teaching. She would remember her father's words, "Maya, flying is about more than controlling an aircraft. It's about making decisions under pressure, staying calm when everything goes wrong. These lessons will serve you well in anything you do." He had taught her well. And on that terrible, impossible day, when an 11-year-old girl became the only person who could save a burning aircraft full of people, those lessons had been enough. They had been exactly enough. Maya Rodriguez, the girl who landed a burning jet at 11 years old, carried that legacy forward. She honored her father through helping grieving children, improving aviation safety, and showing the world that courage and knowledge can overcome impossible odds. Her story reminds us that we never know when our skills might be needed. That teaching our children is the most important thing we can do. And that sometimes heroes come in small packages, scared and grieving, but brave enough to do what must be done.